He was a war veteran, a decorated captain, and the only black man in first class that day, until a champagne glass shattered and a finger pointed. But what happened next shook a $120 million empire. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. The champagne flute shattered on the carpet of seat 1A, but what broke louder than glass was the silence of the first-class cabin. Every passenger stopped mid-sentence, mid-scroll, mid-sip. The culprit stood with the elegance of old money and the venom of entitled rage. Eleanor Ramsey, heiress to one of the oldest shipping fortunes in the eastern seaboard. Her finger pointed not at the spilled drink, but at the man beside her. "I will not sit next to him," she hissed, her voice dipped in venom and volume, "not beside the staff." The staff she referred to, Captain Avery Cole, remained still. His uniform was impeccable. Dark navy, with crisp gold stripes wings pinned over the heart. He wasn't flying this flight. He was deadheading airline lingo for traveling as a passenger to another city to command a flight. But now, a lifetime of dignity had just been tossed into the aisle with a splash of Dom Perignon. Avery didn't blink. He had flown war zones and weather systems, had landed jets in snowstorms and thunderstorms, had held his composure as engines failed mid-air and babies cried through turbulence. But somehow, this moment, the pointed finger of a white woman, dripping privilege and disdain, felt more dangerous, more volatile. Eleanor turned to the flight attendant. "Move him, or move me. I paid $19,000 for this seat. I will not fly across the Atlantic beside that." She didn't even say man. The attendant froze, her smile plastered by protocol, but her eyes betrayed discomfort. "Captain Cole is traveling on company assignment," she began. "I don't care if he's flying the damn plane from the wing," Eleanor snapped. "He does not belong here. I asked for champagne, not a lecture in social experimentation." The rest of first class was watching now. Watching with the discomfort of those who know something is wrong but are too afraid to speak. One man pulled his newspaper lower. A woman stared through her phone screen, already recording. Avery looked at Eleanor not with anger, but with a weariness so profound it bordered on ancient. He stood slowly, 6 feet, 2 inches of calm, composed resolve. "My name is Captain Avery Cole," he said, his voice, a steady baritone, carved from decades of professionalism. "I've logged over 12,000 hours in the air. I've trained a dozen of the pilots who fly this very aircraft. I am a veteran, a father, and a human being." He bent slightly, retrieving the broken glass with a napkin. "But if my presence offends you more than your behavior offends decency, I'm sure the airline will be happy to reassign one of us." Eleanor scoffed. "They'd better, or I'll have a statement out by morning." Captain Cole turned to the flight attendant. "I'll wait in the galley. Let her sit where she pleases." The flight attendant nodded, unsure whether she was grateful or ashamed. He walked away without another word. What no one knew, what Eleanor Ramsey, with her net worth and noise, certainly didn't know, was that within 48 hours, Captain Avery Cole would freeze the largest discretionary fund the airline had ever assembled. $120 million of future infrastructure retirement and R&D projects. frozen with one vote. His vote. Because Captain Avery Cole wasn't just another pilot deadheading to Geneva. He was also a board-elected trustee of the Airline's Executive Pension Fund, a fund currently preparing a massive high-risk investment involving none other than Eleanor Ramsey's family conglomerate. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about something older, something heavier, something deeper than the surface insult of a drink thrown by a woman who had never been told no. This was about visibility, about years of being unseen in plain sight, about the way he'd been mistaken for a skycap at hotels, about the passengers who had handed him trash as he walked through the aisle in uniform, about the subtle chuckles, the averted gazes, the questions that began with, "Are you sure you're the pilot?" He had taken it all because he had to. Because Chiana, his daughter, needed tuition money. Because Corinne, his wife, had chronic migraines and mounting prescriptions. Because as a black man, in aviation, silence was often mistaken for grace. But silence is not always peace. And sometimes a storm brews at 37,000 feet that has nothing to do with the weather. Back in the galley, Captain Cole exhaled deeply. The door to the cockpit was just steps away. The place he felt at home, in control, in command. But today, he'd been stripped not by uniform, but by perception. And yet, he hadn't flinched. In a small Atlanta suburb, Chiana was checking her phone in a dorm room filled with books and dreams, seeing the clip of her father dignified and silent, standing beside a broken glass. The caption read, "Passenger throws drink at black pilot for sitting in first class." The clip had over 800,000 views in under 3 hours. It was only beginning. Because sometimes dignity breaks louder than glass. And sometimes it doesn't shatter at all. It just shifts. In that shift, something extraordinary was about to take flight. Captain Avery Cole had been flying for 22 years. But now for the first time he was about to soar. The aircraft cruised at 38,000 feet. But inside the fuselage, the cabin pressurized more than just air. It compressed tension, dignity, and the fallout of prejudice. Captain Avery Cole sat quietly in the jump seat near the galley, a cup of untouched coffee in his hands. His mind wasn't on altitude route charts or aircraft weight balance. It was on the weight of something heavier than metal silence. Behind the curtain, separating first class from the rest of the aircraft, Eleanor Ramsey had resumed her self-declared throne in seat 1A. Reclined, draped in cashmere, sipping her second glass of champagne as though her tantrum had been nothing more than a routine in-flight hiccup. The flight attendant had offered to move her politely discreetly, but Eleanor declined, declaring, "Let the help move. That's how we keep the world civil." What she didn't know, what she could not fathom, was that her performance had already become theater. A teenager in business class had captured the entire exchange. The raised voice, the champagne, tossed the dehumanizing demand. By now that footage had breached the clouds tethered to Wi-Fi and rocketing through social media at a speed faster than the 777 could dream of flying. Within hours, Captain Cole trended globally. At first it was outrage, then admiration, then something deeper, a reckoning. The comments poured in. Dignity in uniform. Grace under fire. My son wants to be a pilot. I showed him Captain Cole. Now he wants to be like him. Every mile flown with men like this at the helm is a mile closer to justice. In seat 3D, a woman named Grace Lynn, a journalist for a mid-size outlet, was scrolling through the trending video on her phone, her breath catching, as she realized she was witnessing a cultural moment on board the very plane. She flagged down a flight attendant and whispered, "Is he still on board?" The pilot, Captain Cole. The flight attendant nodded, but said gently, "He's not flying this leg. Just repositioning." Grace pressed, "Can I speak to him off the record? Just thank him." The request was relayed, and moments later, Captain Cole stood in the aisle near row 6, still collected, still regal despite everything. His coffee cup now empty, but his voice still full. Grace rose. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said softly, "but I saw what happened. I've seen it before, just not with this much composure." Captain Cole gave a faint smile. "The air gets thinner up here," he said. "Sometimes, so does decency." "May I quote that?" Grace asked. "Not yet," he replied. "This isn't about me." But it was becoming about him, whether he wanted it or not. As the aircraft sliced through the Atlantic night phones, buzzed and pinged, an editor at a major national paper sent an urgent message. Run it. Full profile. First person if possible. Front page, digital by morning. Newsrooms stirred. Celebrities tweeted. Civil rights organizations posted statements of support. By the time the plane began its descent into Geneva, Ysanger Captain Cole had been shared by over 9 million users across platforms. The airline issued a short, vague statement acknowledging an incident involving one of our crew members and a passenger, but the internet had already written a more compelling press release. In seat 5A, a girl no older than 8 turned to her father, her voice just above the roar of dissent. "Daddy, why was that lady mad at the man in the uniform?" Her father paused, choosing his words like a surgeon chooses tools. "Because some people think uniforms only belong to certain kinds of people," he said. "But they're wrong." Captain Cole looked out the window as the lights of Geneva shimmered beneath them. The runway came into view, white lights guiding the descent with quiet precision. The very thing that made aviation powerful, its adherence to logic, to law, to performance, not preference. They touched down smoothly. Brakes whispered against the tarmac. The aircraft slowed. The tension didn't. At the gate, as passengers stood and retrieved their bags, Eleanor Ramsey gathered her things without meeting anyone's eyes. But she didn't need to. The eyes were on someone else. Captain Avery Cole stepped off the plane not to applause but to awareness. The gate agent recognized him immediately, not from his uniform, but from her Twitter feed. Her eyes widened. She whispered something into her radio. In the arrivals hall, 3 Atlantic Airways executives were already waiting. Captain Cole, one said quickly, "We'd like a word, privately." Avery raised an eyebrow. Regarding what the incident said, another. "And the media fallout." "I see," said Avery, his voice even. "And will Eleanor Ramsey be present for this conversation?" The executives glanced at one another. No one said eventually. "She departed via private transport." "Of course," he replied. "That seems consistent." They escorted him to a small conference room near the airline's Geneva office. There they tried to minimize, to smooth, to spin. But Avery, seated in his uniform, still damp from champagne, did not flinch. "I will not apologize for existing," he said. "We're not asking," one of them began. "Yes, you are," he cut in every carefully worded attempt to dilute the moment, in every suggestion that I should stay quiet until the news cycle calms down. You are asking me to swallow something toxic, and I won't." A silence settled, broken only by the click of an incoming email. It was from the board chair. Subject urgent, pension fund. Vote moved to Monday. Avery leaned back. They didn't know. They still didn't realize. He wasn't just a pilot in first class. He was a decision maker, a steward of the very fund that Atlantic Airways had staked its expansion plans on. And that fund, it was now one man's vote away from being grounded. As he stood to leave, Avery turned to the executives. "You should check your headlines," he said quietly. "Then check your boardroom." And with that, Captain Avery Cole walked out of the conference room and into a world that, whether it was ready or not, had begun to change. The glass towers of Zurich shimmered with morning light as Captain Avery Cole stepped into the corporate offices of Astra Continental Holdings, the quiet financial engine behind Atlantic Airways. The building was all marble metal and manners. Here suits moved like currency, and conversations weren't loud but lethal. It was here, far from the runways and hangars, that the real turbulence began. He was escorted into a private boardroom overlooking Lake Zurich. The view was calming, but the folder on the table wasn't. Inside it were the financial projections for a proposed $120 million investment by the Atlantic Airways Pension Fund, an allocation that would funnel millions into a biotech conglomerate called Genaxia Therapeutics. To the casual eye, the numbers dazzled a 17% projected return in 3 years, major tax incentives through an international partnership, and early-stage momentum around a new neurological treatment. It looked clean, ambitious, even visionary. But Avery wasn't looking at the surface. He knew aviation. And aviation had taught him this: the most dangerous pressure is the kind you don't see. He scanned the fine print with the practiced precision of a pilot reading a checklist. Several flags waved quietly between the lines. Genaxia's new drug hadn't yet passed the European Medicines Agency's final trial phase. The revenue spike projected for Q4 was based not on approved sales, but on speculative licensing deals that hadn't yet closed. And then there were the consultant fees, millions routed through a series of shell firms registered in Luxembourg. He'd seen enough. What had been pitched as a low-risk, high-reward opportunity now looked more like a calculated gamble, one meant to dazzle trustees who didn't ask too many questions or distract them with shiny first-class seats while the engines below caught fire. Avery closed the folder and leaned back. His mind wasn't just on spreadsheets. It drifted to every mechanic he'd seen working double shifts to put kids through college. Every flight attendant counting on that pension. Every line pilot who trusted that someone in a boardroom had their back. This was their money, their future. And it was being offered up like fuel for an aircraft with a broken compass. The knock at the door was sharp. It was Claire Jensen, Vice President of Fund Strategy, and someone Avery had known from his early years at Atlantic. Brilliant, sharp-witted, and always too careful. She stepped in, saw the folder, and sighed. "You're not supposed to have that yet," she said. "I've had it for 30 minutes, Avery replied. "And that's 30 minutes too long." Claire closed the door and took the seat across from him. "It's not what it looks like. That's the problem," he said quietly. "It looks perfect." She paused. "You're not wrong. There are concerns." "Concerns." Avery's voice was calm but edged. "Claire, if a cockpit checklist had this many holes, we'd be grounded until further notice." She rubbed her temples. "You don't understand the pressure from upstairs. The Genaxia deal is being pushed hard. Morrison wants a win after last quarter's stock slide. Wins, built on lies, aren't wins. They're just delayed crashes." Claire looked away. "If we don't vote it through, we lose the partnership with Zurich Mutual. They'll pull their secondary investment." "And if the drug fails?" Avery countered. "If the licensing evaporates, We're the ones holding the rope when it snaps. He stood and walked to the window. Below, boats dotted the lake like toy models. Everything looked small from above, just like passengers from the cockpit. It was only when something went wrong that the weight of every decision landed like gravity. "Claire," he said after a moment, "you have family in the airline, don't you?" "My brother? Regional pilot." "Why then think about who you're betting with? Not numbers. People." Her voice softened. "Why do you care so much? Most trustees don't even read the first 5 pages. Avery turned. "Because every one of those people trusted the system, trusted us, and because one of them is my daughter." Claire blinked. "Avery." "I didn't know. She starts her job next month, air traffic controller in Seattle. She won't be rich, but she'll be proud, and one day she'll count on that pension. So, no, I'm not rubber stamping a fairy tale for someone's quarterly bonus." Claire sat in silence. Her loyalty stretched thin between truth and ambition. "There's more," she finally said. "The consultancy fees. They trace back to a firm connected to Thomas Baylor Morrison's college roommate. He's been brokering insider deals through straw accounts. I didn't say anything because I didn't know who to trust." "You just did," Avery replied. "Now, help me prove it." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of data dives, encrypted emails, and midnight calls with ethics lawyers. Avery pulled in 2 other trustees, both former pilots, quietly, discreetly. Together, they unearthed more timelines that didn't match trial data that had been altered shell companies that dissolved the moment they were mentioned. By Sunday night, they had enough. Avery prepared a presentation for the full board. He didn't use dramatic headlines or emotional appeals. He used facts, cross-referenced reports, legal documents, screen captures of internal communications linking Morrison to Genaxia's shadow funders. When the last slide faded, silence filled the boardroom. "Either we freeze the vote," he said, "or we become accessories to fraud." Someone coughed. Another shifted in their chair. Morrison, pale and tight-jawed, said nothing. Finally, Claire spoke. "I move to suspend the investment pending a full investigation." Seconded. And just like that, the $120 million deal, the golden goose of Atlantic's future, was frozen. As Avery walked out of the boardroom, his phone buzzed with a message from his daughter. "Dad, I saw the news. They're calling you the pilot who grounded Wall Street." He smiled, typing back, "Just did what I was trained to do. When the pressure drops, stay calm and breathe." What he didn't type, what he didn't need to, was this: "There's more turbulence ahead." But for once, the system blinked first. The next morning, headlines exploded across every major financial outlet. $120 million pension vote, frozen amid corruption allegations, Atlantic Airways under federal scrutiny. After pilot flags, fraud Captain Avery Cole. Sparks financial storm, with boardroom bombshell Avery. Sat alone in a modest airport cafe in Geneva, watching the ticker crawl along the muted TV behind the bar. A steaming mug of coffee sat untouched in front of him. His uniform still crisp, his mind anything but. He hadn't come to Geneva for a layover. He'd come because the European headquarters of Genaxia Therapeutics was here, and because someone had offered to talk. Her name was Dr. Elise Moreau, a former senior pharmacologist who'd quietly resigned from Genaxia 3 months ago. The world believed she left for personal reasons. The truth she'd told Avery, in an encrypted email, was uglier. She was ready to speak, but only face to face. He recognized her immediately as she walked into the cafe. tired eyes. The kind of weariness that no vacation could fix. "Captain Cole," she said, extending a hand. "You don't look like a pension trustee." He gave a half smile. "You don't look like someone who used to keep billion-dollar secrets." They sat in a corner booth far from prying ears. Elise wasted no time. "I worked on the trials for NX-17 Genaxia's flagship drug. We had early indicators, good indicators, but Phase 3 was a disaster. Severe side effects in elderly patients. At least 4 hospitalizations, possibly more. They should have halted everything. But they didn't. No. They buried it. Redefined the trial's primary endpoints, dismissed adverse events as anomalies. They had too much riding on the stock. Too many investors expecting a miracle. She pulled out a flash drive and set it between them. Every internal memo, every manipulated report, every ethics board concern. It's all here. You're not just dealing with bad investments, Captain. You're dealing with a cover-up that's going to kill people if this drug hits the market." Avery stared at the drive for a long moment before pocketing it. "You realize what this means," he said quietly. "You'll be dragged into this. I already was. Now I choose the side I want to be on." Back in the States, the situation at Atlantic Airways had shifted from simmer to boil. Shareholders were livid. Union members were rallying outside corporate offices with signs that read, "Trust earned, not sold, and we are not just numbers." The board convened a special emergency session. Morrison was absent. Rumors swirled that he'd flown to the Cayman Islands under the guise of personal leave. Inside the boardroom, Avery stood with Claire Jensen and Elizabeth Rowe, another trustee and a former pilot turned labor advocate. The atmosphere was taut. Lines had been drawn. The flash drive from Geneva was now evidence in an expanding federal investigation. "I never imagined my name would end up in an SEC file," Claire whispered beside him. "I never imagined I'd be the one who put it there," Avery replied. "But here we are." The meeting began with formalities quickly dispensed. Elizabeth rose to address the room, her voice clear, seasoned by years of speaking truth to power. "The pension fund belongs to our employees, to our crews, our dispatchers, our baggage handlers. They trusted us to be stewards, not speculators. What happened with Genaxia was not just mismanagement, it was deception. And someone must answer for it." When she was done, silence lingered until one board member, a longtime executive, finally broke. "I was told the risk was minimal," he said, "that the returns were guaranteed. I didn't know it was all smoke." Claire turned to him. "That's not an excuse. We're paid to know, to ask questions, to verify." Another member chimed in. "Then let's fix it. We can't undo the past, but we can ensure it never happens again." The vote to terminate the Genaxia proposal was unanimous. Morrison's contract was officially terminated by day's end. Federal agents issued warrants for multiple individuals connected to the investment scheme, including Thomas Baylor, the mysterious consultant whose firm existed only on paper. The dominoes had begun to fall. But the story didn't stay inside the walls of corporate governance. It became something else, something bigger. A group of mechanics in Chicago printed T-shirts that read, "Avery Grounded Fraud." Aviation students at Tuskegee University formed a scholarship in his name. And at a union gathering in Dallas, Avery stood in front of hundreds of flight crew members, many of whom he'd never met, but who saw him as something new, a voice they didn't expect, but had desperately needed. He didn't give a speech. He gave a challenge. Don't wait for a title to lead, he told them. Don't wait for a crisis to care. Because dignity, like safety, is a full-time job. And no system, no company, no industry changes unless we demand it. Together. That night, as Avery returned to his hotel, he found a message waiting on his phone. It was from his daughter. Dad, I heard what you said. I'm proud of you. We all are. He stared at the screen for a moment, heart full. She was just beginning her career. But because of this, because of all of it, she'd start her path on stronger ground. Because someone somewhere had finally said enough. As Avery looked out the window at the stars above the Dallas skyline, he thought of his favorite part of flying. Not the takeoff, not even the landing, but the moments in between. When you're above it all, but still tethered to responsibility. That's what this had been. A reckoning, and maybe a reset. The runway lights shimmered beneath the early morning haze at JFK as Flight 601 prepared for departure. Captain Avery Cole sat in the left seat of the Airbus A350, his hands moving with practiced grace across the overhead panel. First Officer Jenna Morales, decades younger, but sharp and steady, ran through the checklist beside him. The hum of readiness filled the cockpit, not just of the aircraft, but of something larger. Avery had flown thousands of flights across continents and over oceans, through weather and war zones of public scrutiny. But today, as the tower cleared them for takeoff, something felt different. There was no turbulence in his chest, no lingering doubt about what had happened or what he had done. The Genaxia fraud was being prosecuted. Former executives were in custody. Employee pensions had been protected. But the real shift wasn't in balance sheets or media headlines. It was in the people. 6 months had passed since that humiliating incident in first class. The day Patricia Ellingsworth tried to reduce him to a uniform, to a label, to something small. She had since resigned from her foundation's board and issued a public apology. Her words weren't what mattered. Her actions were. She donated $3 million to a new endowment fund, one Avery didn't ask for but helped shape. The Cole Initiative for Ethical Leadership launched with its mission, Simple Empower, underrepresented professionals in aviation and finance with the tools to lead, question, and reform. The first class of fellows had already been selected. Most were women. Many were black. All were fierce. Avery never liked the spotlight. He wasn't built for stages or sound bites. But somehow, he'd become a symbol, not of anger, but of resilience. Of what happens when a man refuses to bow not just to prejudice, but to convenience. He remembered a moment from the Senate hearing where he testified months ago. A senator had asked him, Captain Cole, if you could go back to that flight, would you have done anything differently? He paused before answering. I would have stood up sooner. Now seated high above the tarmac again. Avery wasn't chasing vindication anymore. He was flying because he loved it. Because he still believed in the magic of lift. In the beauty of structure meeting trust. In the idea that even heavy things can rise. Back in the cabin, passengers fastened their seatbelts, unaware that their captain had become a national figure. Some might have seen the headlines. Some might have shared the video. Most had moved on. But one passenger hadn't. Tyler, now 10, sat in seat 2B, wearing a miniature pilot's cap and clutching a signed model plane. His mother, Denise, smiled as she watched him press his nose to the window. He had written Avery a letter the week prior. Dear Captain Cole, I still want to be a pilot. Thank you for showing me I can. Please teach me how to fly someday. Avery had written back. Not a form letter, but a promise. That if Tyler worked hard, he'd help him get there. Not just with words, but with Access Mentor's resources. Because dignity didn't end with exposure, it began with opportunity. As the aircraft gathered speed, the engines roaring in harmony, Avery felt the quiet resolve that had carried him through storms far more violent than weather. He thought of his daughter Maya now in law school, who quoted him in a speech about professional ethics. He thought of his late father, a Tuskegee mechanic, who used to tell him, "One day you'll fly higher than they ever let me." The aircraft lifted from the earth wheels, tucking into the belly nose, pointed skyward. As clouds enveloped them and New York fell away below, Avery finally allowed himself to breathe. This wasn't the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a new one. Legacy, he'd learned, wasn't built in titles or accolades. It was built in quiet decisions. In the refusal to sit quietly when others were silenced. In the courage to turn a moment of indignity into a movement for accountability. And most of all, in the determination to make the sky more open, more just for everyone who followed. Altitude set, Jenna said beside him, cruising at $38,000. Copy that, Avery replied, voice steady, clear. Let's show them how smooth the skies can be. And they flew on forward, upward into light. Captain Avery Cole's story began with a routine deadhead flight and ended with a reckoning that rippled through one of America's largest airlines. What began as an act of blatant prejudice being removed from his first-class seat for no reason other than the color of his skin became a catalyst for a much deeper investigation into power corruption and integrity. But more than the viral video, more than the headlines or hearings, it was Avery's quiet defiance and his commitment to dignity that left the deepest impact. He could have walked away. He could have taken the settlement, buried the shame, and preserved his career in silence. But instead, he chose truth. And in doing so, he uncovered a $120 million fraud scheme, protected thousands of pensions, and helped reshape how one company, and many watching, viewed justice and representation. Avery didn't see himself as a hero. He was a pilot, a father, a husband, a professional who believed in excellence, not because it was expected, but because it was right. And yet, through courage and restraint, he reminded us all that real change often comes not from grand speeches or loud protests, but from calm, firm resolve in the face of wrongdoing. The lesson is clear: dignity isn't something granted. It's something we carry. And in a world where bias, both overt and subtle, still challenges who belongs in which room or which seat, Avery's story calls us to ask, what do we stand for when no one else will? Will we choose the easy path or the right one? In today's world, where headlines fade quickly and outrage burns fast but briefly, this story lingers because it speaks to something deeper: integrity, legacy, and the power of one person standing tall when it matters most. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect, feel, or even see the world a little differently, please consider supporting our work. Hit the subscribe button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and help us keep telling the stories that challenge, uplift, and unite us. Because sometimes, all it takes to change the course of history is one seat, one voice, and one decision not to move.